Hi, this is Ed Breniger. Welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Greg Suart, who we're just getting to know one another. And he is connected to me now because of a podcast that he watched a while back. So thank you, Greg, for watching, and thank you for reaching out to me. And welcome to the podcast. And I look forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you, Eddie, because you reached out to me as well and invited me, and I much appreciate that. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. So tell us a little about who you are. I'm not sure what you do, and so this is before you say anything. This is the prime example, everyone, of what a first conversation can be like. And so pay attention. This is going to be excellent. Well,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well because before we started recording, we spoke for about 2 minutes.
yeah.
So other than that, this is our first conversation. Yeah, look, my backstory very quickly. I was born here when was taken as a babe to Uganda, where I spent the first 8 years of my life. And you have some connections in Africa as well. So I think in East Africa, it'd be interesting to know what they are.
In West Africa. Mm.
Oh, West Africa. And uh, then came back when I was 8, based here in the UK. Um, as a teenager, I was always interested in science fiction and also I was brought up in a very Catholic upbringing. I, whilst whilst practicing Catholic, I was very much kind of a spiritual seeker. So I was always asking questions about what's the full story? What am I not being told? So
Mm.
I'd be reading about supernature and the out of body experiences of Eastern meditators and gurus and so forth. All of those things were going on. Another strand, though, was I was always interested in business, and business took over my life, and business dominated my life until I was in my mid 30s, when I went off and did an MBA, and then struck off and went and became an entrepreneur, building my own, starting my own operations companies. At which point I was really full on, and I got a repetitive strain injury in both my arms. First of all, it was one arm, so I moved the mouse across to the other hand, learned how to do it left-handed, and that arm then suffered repetitive strain injury. And effectively, I was incapacitated for about 18 months. And this had me completely, it forced me to reevaluate everything that I was doing. There was nothing wrong with me bodily. I did go along to see some doctors because I was urged to do so, but all they wished to do was put my arm in plaster, which didn't seem to me to make any sense at all. Um, it was clearly, what I was doing up here. What software was I running about my life? I needed to really reboot, recalibrate. Um, those 18 months were amongst the toughest periods of my life, also the most rewarding because it completely gave me the chance to reevaluate everything. And following that, it got me into meditation, got me into a whole lot of um, spiritual exploration, self-inquiry, all that stuff, all good stuff. Um, and from that point, there was always a big part of me which was, what is my personal journey? What is the purpose of this? And what I sought to do then was to run my business and run my earning a living around my personal journey of whatever that was. So I started coaching, that led me into leadership, led me into team building, led me into that kind of corporate executive coaching and so forth. And where I focus that and still do is on personal mastery. So the idea there being that which is personal, that which is me, a separate a separate being, my body, my mind, my emotions. Mastering that. But then you get to the question, well, who's doing the mastering? It brings a focus to, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I'm not my emotions. I'm working with my body, my mind, my emotions. So who am I? So I'm something more than all of that. And so that's how I framed and do frame my executive coaching, my leadership development, and so forth. And depending upon where the people are that I work with, it's anywhere along that spectrum. And sometimes it goes way off piste into very profound conversations about, do I even exist, and so forth. And so that's what I do from a coaching point of view, from a work point of view, from a that's ultimate goal, which is the company that I run, which does that. And then recently, the last couple of years, I've been thinking about a lot of different things. I have a couple of kids. They're now in their late teens, early 20s. And there's a whole lot of what's the word? It's context. I know you're keen on context as well. Context is everything. So part of my context becomes as my life, but also their life. So I start to think about actually what's going on for them, what's happening in their world, and what is my what can I meaningfully do now that is relevant to the next generation. And where that has taken me is to through a very circuitous journey and through lots of different reinventions, to launching Metaconscious Leaders, which is a podcast where the focus is bringing philosophy into business. And it's bringing philosophy into business, not taking business into philosophy. Because for me, business typically is framed as being something to make a profit. You go into business to make money, for me, business is an organizing principle. Yeah, we have the business of making a profit. We have the business of making food. We have the business of farming. We have the business of family. And we have the business of governance. All of these things are businesses insofar as they have inputs and outputs, and they need balancing. They need organizing. And if you don't get the balance right, then it goes bankrupt, or whatever it may be. And the same occurs to a family, which may go into debt, as it does to a business, which doesn't, it's not able to sustain itself. So for me, it's about bringing philosophy into business, because business has become so focused on making a profit that it's. I should step back from this for a moment, because I don't want to give business a bad rap, and I think I was beginning to go down that track, and that's not what's intended. I think there are some amazing things happening in business, just as there are some things which are not so good. Bringing philosophy into business is, there are two philosophical models. One is materialism, and the other is based on consciousness. So the first says that everything is physical, and as complexity arises somehow within that physical, with all that physical stuff, and you get organisms arising, and you get human beings, and then they're very complex brains, and out of the brain pops consciousness. So complexity in organisms delivers consciousness as an epiphenomenon. The other philosophy is, and there are many different philosophies, but these are just the two essential ones, and is what's commonly known as idealism, where it's not material, not physicality that is fundamental, it's consciousness that's fundamental. And out of consciousness arises matter. And this is now confirmed by quantum science. So quantum science shows us that there is no materiality, that the smallest of particles are excitations of a quantum field, a field of potentiality. And that whole model is, we haven't got time to go into that at the moment, but that model is so much richer in meaning and possibility than the material model. And I've had experience of that in different times of my life where I know it to be the case. So my feeling is that when that gets brought into business, and that we in business as leaders work with that philosophy rather than the material philosophy, then it opens up our eyes to oceans of meaning and possibility that are not there if our worldview is that this is a physical planet and that when I die, that's the end of it, the lights are out and there is no more. And so that's where metaconscious leaders arises from. It's also spurred by some amazing people who are out there now who have been incredibly successful in business, who know their science, and who are now working in the philosophical realm because they realize latterly that this is not a physical universe, this is a conscious universe. And so it was that was kind of a starting point to bring philosophy into business, because there are some very credible people out there talking in a way that it can be digested, I believe, quite easily by people in business, and it can benefit business leaders at a personal level as well as a corporate level, to act more beneficially.
I totally get what you're saying. Your course in life is very similar to mine. That constant changing, that constant development of awareness of what exists, of putting things together to make sense of things that didn't make sense before, making those connections, seeing the relationships between different ideas, but different things, places, all those things. The question I have is, how do you explain that this is the life that you've lived? What was the source of that, in the sense of that permitted you to say, I'm going to continue to open up to whatever is out there? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't know. I used to think I was in control of my life, or I used to be obsessed with trying to make sure that I had control of my life. And I've spent quite a bit of time, yeah, with in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, for instance, questioning my agency. And do you know what? I had a conversation with somebody a little short while ago where there was something about success, successes in life. And in thinking about it, I found myself saying that I can look at my life in two ways. It's either a string of failures, or else it's a lifetime exquisitely orchestrated. What I was meaning by that is that the things that I planned to do in life have not happened generally. Yeah.
Yeah.
They certainly haven't happened in the way or to the degree that I had intended. Therefore, my mind says failure, failure, failure. Yeah. Because I set myself targets, I set myself goals, and they didn't happen. What happened to its own volition. So I'd be trying to achieve one thing and something else would pop up, and that, what I was trying to achieve would fail and something else would arise. I go, wow, where did that arise from? I've found my life very often things are going swimmingly and suddenly there's a roadblock. And I have no option but to move away. So for instance, my RSI, my repetitive strain injury, was a roadblock. It prevented me from doing what I was doing. There have been some other instances in my life where roadblocks have just appeared as if I'm not the only one that's orchestrating this life.
Mm-hmm.
I question my agency in my life. Now, that's not to say that I don't, there's an interesting philosophical conversation about how much free will or do we have free will or whatever. Um, I believe we do have free will, but there's something else happening. There's something else going on. And where I think the free will we have is very real is, do we accept what is happening or do we fight it?
Mm-hmm.
Do I roll with what is occurring in my life or do I resist it and fight it? Because one is quite joyful. It's like, oh wow, that didn't happen. Oh, this is happening instead. Um, and the other one is painful because I'm beating myself up because I haven't succeeded. This shouldn't be like this. It's meant to be somewhere different. So that's a pretty painful life. Um, and actually, this story here is I think quite a good example of this. I'd arrived this is about 10, 15 years ago. I'd arrived in a new place, a new town where I was in a third floor flat, and I walked out of the flat, and as the door clunked behind me, I realized I hadn't got my keys and I hadn't got my phone, and I was in a new town and I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any numbers on me. I was completely bereft. My car keys, everything were in the flat, and it was a big thick flat, a big thick door on the. And so I'm starting to, there's a bit of me, a big part of me that's beginning to panic. And then I remember that my spaghetti is on the boil. So now I reckon I've got 10 minutes before the spaghetti's dry and the gas is going to be, and I'm really, the adrenaline is really beginning to pump. And there's a little voice inside me that says, in a week's time, you're going to be telling the story and you're probably going to be laughing. What happened next? And that opened up a completely new vista. And I began to imagine that, I'd phone up the fire brigade and ask them whether or not there needed to be a fire or whether a guaranteed, a promise of a fire was sufficient to get them to come out and prevent one. And then somebody came out of their flat door and complete stranger and said, "Oh, hi, well, blah blah blah. How are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a bit stressed at the moment because." And this person said they were a decorator. And that on this one occasion, because it never happened usually, on this one occasion, he had his ladders on his van outside. So he put the ladders up to my third floor window and climbed in, and the spaghetti was dry. Hadn't quite charred, but that was the next part of the process. So I, what nudged me? I feel as if I've been nudged all the way through life.
Yeah.
And I feel as if I've been blessed all the way through life. And I've been kicked a few times as well.
You know,
Um,
when when I went to college, um, I found out really quickly that I wasn't well suited to academic work because I was a big picture guy and everything that was presented to me was very detail oriented. and we would, there's a 500-page book in history that we're going to have to read. You're going to have to know it, all the information in that. And I just don't think that way. And I recognize that. I didn't know what to do about that. And it led to not knowing, so what am I going to do with my life? What kind of work? What kind of career? Because I realized that almost every career requires you to be very detail oriented. You have to master the details of the work that you have. And I think that's one of the reasons why I ended up in ministry to begin with, because it was a people oriented kind of work. And you didn't really have to master details. You just had to master how you communicated and interacted with people. But what I discovered was uh, I was much more than just being able to interact with people. That big picture thing was actually a way of connecting the world at a much larger level of detail than what you would get in just a single book. And so what you're talking about is something I think that many of us experience, which is that there are all these kind of conceptions of the way we are to experience life, and there are a lot of people who are very good at describing that, and there are other people who say, well, I have a different view of that. And what I realized is that I never knew what I was supposed to be or what I was supposed to become. And here I am in my 70s, and I still do not really know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I'm supposed to be doing the podcast, but beyond that, I really don't know. And so the conclusion I came to is I'm supposed to respond to what is presented to me. What comes in front of me, I'm going to respond to that, and I'm going to do whatever is necessary to be the best responder to that situation as I can be. And by not having, I do have a purpose. So I'm not saying I don't have a purpose, but by not having a defined box that I fit into that has to follow me wherever I go, it has allowed me, and I think very much like you, allowed me to venture into places where I don't belong. And nobody, 50 years ago would have thought, oh, well, of course, that's where he's going to end up. No one would have thought that. And yet here I am doing these things and have done things, and I fully expect to do things that I have no conscious awareness of at this point in time. So what I'm driving at is that we have a conception of life and how it is lived that I think is poorly defined by the modern world, which is very structured and very materialistic, mechanical. I mean, all those things you've already mentioned. And I think that openness to the world is part of the beauty of what exists at a much larger scale than what we have been taught to see as the way the world is.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what comes in here as well is doing and be in a material world. We're obsessed with form and function. We're obsessed with action. We don't pay so much attention to, and it's not to say that people don't, because throughout business, throughout the world, there is incredibly good stuff going on. We'll come on to that later, but the structures are really around a physicalist paradigm, a materialistic paradigm.
Right.
They don't give value to the numinous. They don't give value to that which is not physical. And as everything you can measure is not of value, and everything of value cannot be measured. And what he also said is that we can't solve problems at the level of thinking that they were created. We need to rise to a higher level. In other words, we we don't only need to look at the actions and their outcomes, but we need to look at the assumptions that they're based upon. And the assumptions that most things are based upon is essentially a material philosophy, that there is no sacred, that there is no life after death, that there is nothing more than just a physical body and a brain that seems to spout consciousness.
Do you
And
feel do you feel that um that this dichotomy between the material and the phenomenological or the spiritual or the conscious, do you feel like that relationship that has existed where one is more dominant than the other, do you feel like that is changing in the world? Is there a change happening there that you see?
I think so, yes. I hear more and more people talking about this being an age of awakening.
Yeah.
And so when I started off with metaconscious leaders in my mind, I was thinking more of a campaigning thing. It's like we need to be talking more about this. And now I'm thinking but the more I've got into it, the more I've looked at people, and I started off with half a dozen. I've now got loads of people that I want to talk to, and I'm realizing that there is an enormous amount of good stuff going on. So I'm really now seeing metaconscious leaders as lending a voice to and enabling what is already happening to become mainstream, to come above the surface and become mainstream and normal to talk about. This is not about throwing business out of the window or not making a profit or not giving all your wealth. It's not about any of that. It's just about enriching life to another level. Um, yeah. Um,
So,
I had a thought in my head and I forgot what it was.
well, I think there are a lot there are lots of things that are flowing through our heads that cause us to pause and say, "Wow," or what does this really mean?" I think because I do think this is a period of change, and I think it's not just simply at a philosophical level. I think philosophy is very important and central to it, but I think it's much more than, well, we're moving out of a more materialist age into something else. I think it's also an age where the way we structure the world is going to change. And it's going to look different than what it's looked for the last 100, 200, 300 years. And
Oh, I think I agree completely with yeah.
so in So the question is, let's take that question of what changes to the world of business. And so how do you
Can
see?
Eddie, can I just come back onto because I remember what I was
Yes, yeah, yes.
about just a moment ago, um, which was this thing of an age of awakening, and metaconscious leaders being an attempt to really we're very much it's very much along similar lines to you, but using different language, um, slightly different language, and that is that uh, change takes a long time to happen or to come about, but when it does, it happens faster than you can imagine.
Hmm.
So, in terms of a paradigm shift and in terms of a period of awakening, what I thought was a long way away, I don't think is necessarily a long way away because I see the undercurrent of growing awareness is very, very strong amongst young people as well as old people. And so the conditions, an optimistic view has me seeing conditions as being ripe for a tipping point
Hmm.
at which moment change will happen faster than we can imagine and will unpredictably so as well. It's not to say it will be easy, not for one moment, but it will change.
Totally agree with you. And that's what's interesting. 25 years ago, when I first uh, formed the my circle of impact model of leadership, one of the things that I saw then was that the structure of organizations was inhibiting the ability of people to have clarity about their thinking, about their sense of purpose, their values, and it inhibited their ability to establish relationships of respect and trust and mutuality. And I knew that if if the structure was inhibiting those sort of things, which I think are more universal than the structure of a business, I felt like that we were entering in the end of something, and we were going to see something new emerge from this. And I was asking the question, so what is it that I think I will, what is it 50 years from now? We're talking now 2050. What is it that we'll see having been the product of this time of transition? And what I came to is that I think what we'll see is a higher form of community, of relationships between people, both in physical places, but in businesses and in around the world, and that will be a totally different way of seeing how we are to function in the world together. I don't know what actually that looks like, but it just had the sense that the importance of our relationships to one another will rise to the kind of to be the top of that hierarchy of importance that is needed for a society to function well.
And I I completely concur with your vision of these relationships. The picture I hold in my mind when you talk about that is I imagine us as nodes of consciousness, if you like, and the relationships connecting them all together. And each time you connect a node, you're increasing the web of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Each time you make a connection of that sort, you reduce the level of separateness and increase the sense of oneness. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And from a business point of view, there are a number of challenges that I've listed within the sort of metaconscious leaders thing, which is one of them is competition versus cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
So commercial business is founded on competition, and competition is basically survival of the fittest, and it doesn't have a happy ending.
Right.
Cooperation, by the way, I'm not saying competition doesn't have a place, but as things become more complex, and certainly in the world where we're at the moment, there needs to be more cooperation because the complexity and nature of the of our society globally now requires cooperation. Competition has kind of reached its sell-by date. Growth is another thing. GDP growth is like there needs to be another way of measuring purpose. And at the moment, purpose is we've got to have a GDP growth. So we're failing, or we're starting to fail. But we need to recalibrate that.
Well, and I'm not advocating or denigrating in any way, but it takes someone who um, has a perspective which is really different, and also has the kind of the courage to take that different perspective into the marketplace to cause the kinds of to trigger the kinds of change what we're seeing here in the U.S. with President Trump. And one of the things, I mean, just one of the questions that is now being discussed is How should we define what GDP is? And now there's a lot of questions about whether it has been a valid measure. I mean,
And
I don't know. That's not my field, but the fact that we now can have these conversations I think is really the next stage of how we move into this next era of whatever it really looks like.
yeah, and so I think there's and I wasn't aware of the of such a close synergy when you first invited me. Um, but I do see there's a lot of synergy between what you're doing, what I'm doing, um, and what so many other people are doing. And it is about metaconscious in my language. And I'm not saying metaconscious is just another way of saying it. That effectively what we're doing is we are promoting or celebrating the rise in awareness.
That's right.
And with the rise of awareness comes uh, just an infinity of possibility.
And it's just not in the UK and in the United States. It's all over the world. It's taking place all over the world. And
Correct.
and if you listen to say half of my podcast episodes, you'll hear this coming through. I mean, this is, I don't want to say I'm a leading indicator because I don't believe that's true. But what I am capturing is a disintermediated awareness that's taking place that somehow is being expressed through now well over 220 people who have been on this show and talk about things like you are, and they're all talking about it in their own language, in their own ways, from their own experience and their own context. But if you step back and you listen to what's going on, you realize that there's this awakening that is taking place, and what people feel about that is a sense of optimism and, oh, I have been missing something. Now I want to be a part of that. What is that I
Mm.
want to be a part of? I don't know what that is. And so there is the opportunity for people to discover things that they would never have thought about 10 years ago.
Yeah. I I love with clients of mine going off piste, going, yeah. I once took somebody into going for a walk, a CEO, and it was not in my intention to do this, but he ended up hugging a tree. It, it it's just that when we get into the natural world, we're no longer in the manufactured human construct. We behave differently.
Yeah.
Um, we respond differently.
So let me
Yeah.
let me ask you this. Let's assume that there are people watching this for whom this is a totally new concept, new construct, a new way of thinking. What would you suggest to them to be an initial path forward where they can begin to explore what metaconsciousness would be?
Um, so it's a personal, it essentially it's a personal inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that there's any particular path, but there are certain characteristics. One is questioning everything. Mark Twain said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure, which ain't so." So we, I do this myself. Everything that we do is predicated upon a belief.
Mm-hmm.
The belief, a belief is some frozen form of knowledge. It's this is the way it is. Well, is it? And most importantly, that is something that we can apply to identity. Who am I? And and part of who am I is who do I think I am, and what am I meant to be doing? All of these things. Yes, we have a drive to have purpose, but we don't need to be obsessed, I believe, with knowing everything, controlling everything. We can be in the moment, accept the flow of our life, what is happening around, and embrace that in a very positive way, in a very dynamic way. Yeah, self-awareness and wisdom and compassion and all of these things, they are sometimes taken for being soft, weak, all of those things. Far from it. The people who are most effective are the people who have real clarity about who who they are, or yeah, yeah, who they are, what is their purpose in that moment, almost without judgment. And it sounds there are a lot of I'm very aware that some of the things that I'm saying appear to be contradictory. So it's being open and clear. um, but when we are present in a moment, we know what is right. When we are really present in a moment, we are wise. Because when we're actually in the moment, we are without belief, because belief is a memory. Belief is a memory that we're pulling into the present and saying, this should be this way. He is this type of person. She is that type, got that kind of history, and therefore, when we leave all that aside and we are present, we are then able to make an assessment, make a judgment on what is pertinent in the moment.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I think another thing is that we tend to see everything as a doing. We see our lives as a doing. We need to be, and we see personal awareness or personal mastery or whatever as a doing. It's like, well, how long is it going to take me to get there? What are the 5 steps? What do I have to do? Ooh, well, maybe you're already there. Well, we are already there. As somebody once said, I heard him say, you know, I've got news for you. You are already enlightened. You never did leave the garden. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but our minds, and this comes back to philosophy, our minds have, and our whole culture is built around action, goals, achievements, metrics, and there is no room for those things that can't be measured, they can't be weighed. What about love? What about wisdom? What about peace? Uh, what about all these things that actually make us feel good, but you can't cash them in at the bank?
Well, we're reorienting our perception of the world, and we're reorienting our perception of ourselves. And we're in one of the ways that I've decided to do that is to, and I'm not criticizing your language, but to stop thinking of us according to a title. I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm just I am who I am, and I am going to respond to the world as from wherever I am right now. And I think about it in terms of like the person who helped you get back into your flat because they had a ladder. Well, that person wasn't thinking about being a painter or an electrician or what they were. That's not what their role was. Their role was simply to be an agent of service in the moment of need that you had. And I think that's an illustration of the kinds of things that when we are able to find that, then we are able to discover more deeply who we are and nurture that, and then share that with people, and even more so, identify that in other people. So they're not the boss or not the worker or they're not the agent of change or they're not a label. They're Bob or they're Jan or they're Brad or they're whoever they may be. They're a person with a name who I'm going to try to connect to and see. I wonder what we have to share together.
So these synchronicities are happening all the time. The question is whether we're aware of them.
I know
Uh,
that's exactly right.
and I think if the more we kind of, the more that a part of me watches and is aware of what is occurring, what is happening, then I notice things happening. I go, wow, look, yeah. And I wonder what's going to happen next. And as a lovely quote from Mother Teresa, written on her wall, apparently, was it's not the doing that counts. It's
Yeah,
the love in the doing that counts. And it's not the giving that counts. It's the love in the giving that counts. And if we focus as much, if not more, on being, we can still do the doing. It's not, yeah, the doing's important. Yeah, do the doing. But more important than the doing is the being. Because if I do something, and this is especially relevant to leaders, um, if I do something as a leader with anger, I'm not as effective as if I take exactly the same action with calm, centered calmness.
very true.
And so that that's being. And was it the other phrase which you said, which is a a, a bad plan done well is better than a good plan done badly.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, as we come to a close, tell us how people can find you, learn more about metaconsciousness, more about the things that you have talked about today. How do they connect with you?
Thank you. Well, my my I've got two websites. One is ultimategoal.co.uk, which is my coaching, leadership development, and team building, and metaconsciousleaders.com, which is the podcast, which is launching more or less as we speak. I'm not quite sure when this is going out, but it's launching around about now, and that will be on YouTube as well as LinkedIn and increasingly in other forms of media as well.
That's great. Because I think these are things that we need to be talking about and be exposed to. Well, Greg, I'm so pleased to meet you and to share so many commonalities with you. And I wish you continued, I'm going to say it, success in spreading these ideas about metaconsciousness because I think they're important and I think they can have a transformative effect upon not only people but their organizations and society at large.
Yeah. And I see my work as being very similar to yours as well, which is forming relationships and creating a platform that other people who know and are much more articulate on many of these topics than I am can share their knowledge within a business environment, within a business context, which I think is so important at the time.
The,
So, Eddie, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you, and it's great talking. Yeah, similar stuff,
yeah.
different language, and that's always enlightening, invigorating, and stimulating.
Thank you, Greg,
Thank
and
you.
thank you all for watching. And I hope this has pricked your interest about maybe things that you didn't know existed. They exist, and they're right there in front of you if you're only willing to step back and seek to be aware of what is transpiring. So thank you for watching the Eddie Network podcast, and we'll see you next time right here. Bye-bye.